there's nothing worse than like if another guy or a couple guys like kick your butt, but then your brain is spinning too. You're like, well,
how?
Wait, did they? Or what am I what am I trying to learn from this? But with the competitions, this sounds really weird, but my best competitions are the ones where some French guy or Czech guy just kicks my ass.
Mm-hmm.
That's like my favorite type of competition because my brain starts spinning and going, what did he do or she do? You know, and it's like that type of learning is great. And the funny part too is after these competitions are over, if they speak English, most of these people don't speak English on the world circuit. A lot of them do, I guess. They'll just give you your flies and go, "Here's what I did." You know, I fished blobs underneath the tree limbs, and like, really? Oh my God, I never would have thought of that. That's awesome. Wow. And so you walk away going, you know, that was the best part of my tournament, was realizing that that the art form just keeps moving. Hi there, I'm Pete Erickson, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
Hey, everybody. We got an awesome guest for you today. I'm going to catch up with one of my old friends. Pete Erickson and I happened to get to Jackson, Wyoming in the early 90s. I was there a little bit before him, and then he showed up just a little bit after. He worked in the Orvis shop with my wife, Cynthia, and we were roommates at one point. And Pete has had an amazing career. He won the ESPN Great Outdoor Games. He moved on to be on Team USA, all the while being a professional fishing guide in the Rocky Mountains, mostly on the South Fork of the Snake River. He ends up moving over to Boise, guiding on some other water over there, Silver Creek and South Fork. And he's just had a great career. He's got great perspective. And we're going to talk about this magic time in Jackson, Wyoming, which spawned the careers of myself and Pete and Matson Rogers and Carter Andrews and so many others. I mean, man, I actually made a list of all of these people. Matson Rogers, Fletcher White, Lori Ann Murphy, Kim Keeley, Carter Andrews, Bucky Buckenroth, Jeff Currier, Paul Brune, Tom Montgomery, Bill Happersett, Oliver White, Joe Bressler, Doug Gibson, Ed Emery, so many more. And I probably left out tons and tons of other people that were in and around Jackson and in and around the South Fork of the Snake River at that time. And just a really cool time. And many of those people are still in the fishing business, in the fly fishing business, or in the television fishing business. And it's just cool. So Pete and I have a recollection of why that might have happened and what was so special about that time, which is kind of interesting. But then we go on to the Team USA and the European nymphing, which is a technique kind of brought back from these international competitions. I had a great time talking with Pete. I think you're going to enjoy this. If you do, you can follow Pete Erickson Fly Fishing on Instagram. We'll have all of this in the show notes, but he's a good follow, and you can actually go fishing with him in the summertime. He'd be a great person to be a guide. If you could get any days with him, I'd definitely suggest doing it soon. Really good to connect with my old friend, Pete Erickson. Here we go. Pete Erickson, man, what's going on?
So good to see you and hear your voice.
I know.
Since we hung out.
It really has been. I've done a number of podcasts with people from the Jackson era, and it is amazing what happened from that little short time that we were together out there, 6 or 7 years, and how many of the people that we hung out with stayed in the fishing industry, and some did extremely, extremely well. How did you get to Jackson?
I got to Jackson. I was working for Microsoft, and I was interviewing for a new job. I was a young kid out of the University of Oregon, living in Redmond, that Seattle area. And my boss said, "Why not, before you start your new job, why don't you go take a couple months somewhere and relax?" And it was wintertime, so I went to ski in Jackson Hole because I'd been there before in college. And geez, one thing led to another, and the guys I skied with were saying, you can't leave this area before you at least spend one spring fishing here. Because I said, I've been fishing my whole life in Seattle, fly fishing. And sure enough, I ended up calling my boss and saying, I'm not coming back. and then basically that was about the time where I bumped into you guys. I worked at the Orvis shop and met Joe.
So that was a cool time, because most of the people that got out there and stayed out there, well, I don't know, there was like a magnet of the guide school, and you kind of entered that group slightly different, coming through the Orvis store. And the Orvis store opened probably in 1990, maybe. That was probably my first year out there.
Yeah, Dave Fallon was my boss.
Dave Fallon. Wonder what he's doing today.
Bill Ski and those guys, yeah.
Yeah. And then Cynthia was working in the shop with you.
Yeah. That's probably how I got connected with all sorts of fishing trips and roommate situations with you guys. Cynthia. Had to be nice to the gal that booked the trips, right?
That's right. It was that was such a cool time. I went to the guide school, and then and Fletcher went to the guide school, and then the year later, Matson Rogers went to the guide school, and so many other people, Jeff Klausman, so many other people went through that guide school, and it just turned out to be like the greatest idea for talent recruitment ever, probably. But at the same time, you had across town, you had like the Jack Dennis crowd, you had Carter Andrews and Jeff Currier, and I jotted down some names. We had Paul Brune and Tom Montgomery, Bill Happersett, Oliver White, Doug Gibson was on the South Fork at the time. Ed Emery was on the South Fork at the time. Dirk over there at the South Fork Lodge. Bucky Buckenroth, Gary Beebe, Lorianne Murphy, Kim Keeley. I mean, all of these people. That's like a who's who. It's amazing, really.
It's really a weird deal because on OLN and ESPN, if you flipped it on, it was weird. For 5 to 10 years, I knew everybody personally that was on every show. Like I had spent time in a tent with them on an overnight camp. It was really just strange. Like, how's this all emanating from this one little area?
What do you think it was? What was special about that time or that place?
I think the area attracted us, and also that was the only guide school.
Right.
You're right. It was an original idea that was the only thing, and we were all looking for that. And it was kind of a weird thing. We kind of almost knew it while it was happening too, in the middle of it, because we would see each other all on the river and we would fish together. I mean, you and I, do you remember going out fishing on snowy days?
Yeah, absolutely.
You caught that huge, like 8-pound brown down in the South Fork. That was such a great day.
That was when we were playing around with the giant streamers, and at the time Carter was working on the double bunny, and I was working on the Rowland's rabbit, and his proved to be way easier to throw and smaller and had a cooler name. So it won out. Nobody wanted to throw my creation, which was about a 12-inch cross-cut rabbit with a trailer hook, and it was hard to throw, and it was miserable, really. But
it was a whitefish.
Yeah, it did work a little bit.
It caught that giant fish that day in a snowstorm.
That was awesome. There were so many good memories from that time, and there were so many things. And I've talked about it before, even especially with my kids who have thought about guiding and thought about getting into the fishing business, and it's kind of like, okay, well, when I did, there was a really special thing going on, and there were technology advances of the Gore-Tex wader, of rods were getting better and easier to throw, fly lines were getting better. Everything was getting better and making it more conducive to. It was a little more inviting for people to get into. The Rocky Mountains were getting kind of a lot of tourism, and then you had the movie, and all of those things all combined into this perfect storm of that I really rode for the next, 15 years of my career, because I would get all of these new anglers And I wasn't getting the anglers that Bill Haberset was getting, but I was getting all of these new anglers that had never really fished before. I would teach them how to fish. We would fish together for 4 or 5 years, trout fishing on the South Fork. And then I would say, once I got started in the Keys, I would say, hey, you should really try saltwater fishing. And that whole group of anglers, was ready for this transition. They were like, okay, yeah, let's see what that's about. So when I went down to the Keys, I was able to have a fairly full book, and that was very rare, very, very strange and very rare. And I don't know that I could repeat that had I come a few years earlier or maybe even a few years later. I don't know that would have happened. You know what I mean? It's like, it was a really special time for so many reasons.
Totally true. Yeah. And same with me. I think you're going to ask me a few questions about competitions, and my only competition was the one fly every year because I got a free rod and a shirt. But it kind of was a springboard, all those people in that area. I was able to do well in the fly fishing industry, rod design and working with companies and product design and also getting to travel so much with the competition stuff. So I think what you're talking about was like kind of a springboard in that area. And we also knew everybody, like everybody in the industry. We would have an overnight and I'd be like, hey, Tom, what do you got today? I'm like, I got Charles Jardine in his group, and it'd just be like, really? Down at camp?
Yeah.
I got Lee Perkins today, and it's just like, here we are at camp, with all these luminaries, the people that kind of ran the biz basically. And we were their guides. That's really cool. You learn so much in the boat from those people. So much.
I mean, Charles Jardine coming in from England and really showing us like all this stuff that they were doing over there. And, in some ways they were way ahead, some ways they were way behind. And then you kind of pick up a little pieces of what he's showing you and then apply them on the river. And it was the same kind of deal, like with all of those guys. But, you just, I guess the moral of the story is if you just, keep your eyes open and your mouth shut, you can learn a lot.
And appreciate your time period. Like appreciate it.
Right.
All the young people in the industry right now, they have their own time period happening, and they just need to keep their eyes open and appreciate it because it's happening wherever they are.
Well, it is. And the innovations are happening, whether it's in saltwater or in freshwater, like permit fishing. When I first got to Key West, the permit fishing was just getting started. Del Brown and Steve Huff were inventing the sport, and guides like Marshall Cutchin and so many others were making these big advancements. And the same thing's happening today. I mean, the advancements are even more so today as the sport has matured and everything. And it's like the good old days are right now, like for wherever you are. And you do have to appreciate that and embrace it. And it's cool times now as it is cool times, in the past. But like you've seen this huge technological innovation and technique innovation with Euro nymphing. And that's one of the things that I want to talk to you about. But to get there, you started with some competitions. And I didn't actually know this, but I read this morning in your bio that you won the Great Outdoor Games.
The year after you were there.
Is that right? So 2002? Is that when it was?
I was there 2002, I think, or something like that. Yeah.
Because I got these two posters hanging right here that I was looking at, and I had everyone sign them. And I've got 2000, which is the year that I won. And then I went back in 2001 and didn't win. And I was looking at all the names. I was like, was Pete there that year? Because shortly thereafter, it went to Madison, Wisconsin, or Reno.
Yeah, Madison and then Reno. Right. I think Reno was first. Yeah. Do you see the Outdoor Games poster behind me?
Is that it right there behind you?
Yeah. It's signed by Lorianne, Carter, just everyone that was there.
That's so cool.
Carter even signed it. Go big or go home.
Well, that's what everybody did.
Yeah, I can't remember everybody that was there, but they were a lot of people that I was really excited to meet.
It's super cool that you have that poster, because the 2 years that I did it, they gave us all, there were like these stacks of posters laying around that they couldn't hang up. And they're like, you can take as many as you want. And I took 2, and I thought I had enough foresight to think, man, I should get people to sign this. And I got them to sign it before I won, which was good because I'm not sure that a couple of them might have signed it afterwards. They, you know what I mean? It was like the day before I got everybody to sign it. And then, in 2001, I got them. I thought that's cool too. And it must've been 20 years before I had them framed. And they were just kind of sitting in my tackle room, all in a, in a rod case, really. And I opened this rod case to look what was in there. And I was like, oh, these posters, I forgot all about those. And then Cynthia said, oh, we should get those framed. So I did. Luckily I did. But you thought,
that was my idea too. I did it, actually Courier was spending the night. He was doing a show in Boise, and he was like, this is a good idea getting some of these framed. And so I thought about the other ones and got them framed, Oh, remember Chuck Farnett?
Yeah.
I think he won it the year you were there.
He did.
And he was in it with me, and he signed it. And it's kind of cool because you look back on those times. Like I even have the gold medal thingy here in this room. This office has a lot of my fishing crap in it. And, the ESPN was so like kind of awesome. Like,
yeah.
It was over the top. They flew us out there and they paid for everything. And it was even professional. I got a big check for winning that thing.
Yeah. I think that must have started after I won because I don't remember getting a big check. But I do remember that it was marketed as the next big thing. And they thought this would be like, you got the Olympics every 2 years, and then maybe we could squeeze this in the other years. And this would be kind of another outdoor Olympics kind of X Games kind of thing. Didn't quite make it, but it was cool. It was really cool.
It made it quite a few years, and we were lucky enough to benefit from all of it.
For sure. That was the next question. How do you think that being able to, first of all, participate in that, and then to win it, how did that affect your career from then on?
Yeah, I would say, you knew me as a guide. At that point, I was doing pretty well for Bressler and like one of the lead guides but nothing on the, outside of the Jackson situation, except for, maybe Clackacraft, pro staffs and things like that, but as soon as I won it, it was kind of like a monsoon. I remember the first part was oh geez, whoever the ESPN people were that were in charge were like, hey, you got to make yourself available for autographs tomorrow. I'm like, who wants my stupid signature? Except for the waitress at the diner. She wants me to sign my bill. It was just kind of one of those weird things. There was a whole line of people and it just, it changed a bunch of things because it really opened up a lot of the industry as far as me being able to meet people and do different things like work for, which I'll talk about later, but work for as a rod designer for Ray Jeff and, all that stuff. But, the origin of how I actually got into that, it wasn't because I think Fletcher and you were both in the outdoor games, weren't you?
Yep.
The two of you guys and Lorianne maybe. I didn't even watch it. I didn't even know about it. And which I should have, because of, any type of fly fishing that's being shown to millions of people is kind of a cool thing. So the next year, Fletcher said, hey, you're one of my lead guides. I need you to do this ESPN fly fishing challenge. It's filmed over a week period in Montana on the Spring Creeks in Depews. Yeah. And I was kind of like, I don't like competitions. Like I'm not into it. And I loved all the people involved with the one fly, but at some point I had a guy dive out of my boat to save his fly, an old guy. And it freaked me out. I was like, okay, I don't like competitive juices going and mixing with fly fishing. It just, I had to almost save the guy. And, I was like, this is not cool. And I understood that it's a fundraiser tournament and it does a lot of good, but I just was kind of soured on it. So I said, nah, I don't want to do that. And, Fletch was my boss. So he was like, yeah, no, you're going. And I got to, Mike Dawes, I met him that morning and we jumped in the truck together and drove all the way up. And was kind of cool because a lot of, John Barr and there's a lot of people there from the industry that I had looked up to, geez, who all was there? Bob Jacklin was there. Just a lot of people that I looked at, and they were all on these teams, like Team Sims, Team Sage, so I was like, well, no matter how this thing goes, at least I'm meeting all these cool people, and maybe I can learn something up here. Which ended up being the main reason that I have done competitive fly fishing was relationships and learning and travel and stuff like that. But so we got up there, and I was with Jim Hickey and Whitney McDowell, and we went up there, and we were just supposed to go up there and get exposure for Worldcast, which was the new name, and it was a reality show is what it was. It took place over a week, and I don't know how we did it, but we ended up winning. I'm still not sure how we beat Team Sims. Those guys were guiding on that water the week before. But we ended up winning, and we got an invite to the outdoor games. And at that point, I was now kind of excited because there was a lot of camaraderie. Everyone was nice to each other. It was like John Riggins was the host, it just, I was like, oh, okay, this is a fun experience. Okay. I'm not poo-pooing this anymore. I wonder what the outdoor games are going to be like. And then they flew us out there, and we rented a house, and it was a great, fun experience, as you know. Yeah. One of the biggest things was I hung out with the pro bass anglers. Yeah. Peter T and all these guys were there, and that was their lifestyle. And I was like, you guys have a cool life. This is what you guys are doing. I mean, obviously they're worth tons of money, and, but they were like, no, this is what we do. We travel and we compete. They had all their trucks there with 2 bass boats in it, and we hung out with them. And it kind of changed my opinion of some of the stuff. I started seeing it more like there's competitive skiing, and then there's free skiing. There's people play golf on the weekends, but there's competitive golf too. I started seeing that, there's a little different thing, and I can still have my solitude on Silver Creek or on the ranch on my own. I don't have to deal with this stuff, but this is kind of a different world, and I really don't know what I'm doing, and I can learn a lot. Mm-hmm. And everybody that I've come in contact with has been really cool and really nice. You'd think that it would be people are, competitive and they're not friendly or whatever. It wasn't that way at all. It was the competitions have always seemed kind of like a secondary deal to building relationships and learning about fishing.
Yeah. I had a similar kind of deal with the competitions of not knowing whether I would like it or not, and then getting in my first one and loving it. Like so much of what you just described were the same feelings that I had, but they also conjured up some feelings of like being a high school athlete, and then there was this game day kind of feeling, like, whoa, this is a little different than going out there, and then there was this game day kind of feeling, and then there was preparation and having this event on your calendar, and then preparing for it, and then that. I loved all of that. I loved that. But what I loved more than anything was that in all the different types of tournaments, whether that was the freshwater fly fishing stuff.
Didn't you do a redfish tournament?
Yeah. The redfish tournaments, and then tons of them in the Florida Keys. There was a whole tournament scene there. They were all charity tournaments, and they were cool because at the time it was in the heyday of the red bone tournament. They were trying to cure cystic fibrosis. It was a wonderful deal. The first time I went to one of those tournaments, I almost broke down in tears because of the work that they were doing, and they were making real progress on this terrible disease that the daughter of Gary Ellis had this, and so there was like a face to it, and you knew this little girl, and it was just amazing, and people were raising tons of money, and companies were getting behind it, and they were making real progress, right? And then there would be like 100 boats in one of these things, and there would be a scoreboard, a huge scoreboard. I mean, there was no there was no internet, there was no TVs or anything like that. It was a huge scoreboard with magic marker, everyone's name on there, what you did on day 1, what you did on day 2, how many points you had. And like I used tournament. To just, and I would get up there and I would just stare at this board. and look at it and look at all these guides that I had so much respect for and followed all. And I'm like, wow, they didn't catch anything. And they didn't catch anything. And this guy caught a bunch. And then, you could just kind of see, and you're like, oh, and I saw that guy. I saw him. He was going west and everybody else was going east, and he caught all the fish. And so it just like, it was like turbocharged learning, turbocharged. And,
Totally.
and it was 100%, you knew it was 100% accurate. Like if somebody came in with a score, there were pictures to prove it, it was like 100%. It wasn't doc talk. Somebody didn't say, oh, well, we caught 30, and the biggest one was like 24 inches and nobody's there to say anything else. Right. So you don't know like if that was real or not, or, and so it was like turbocharged learning. There was no bullshit. There was no, smoke and mirrors or anything like that. It was like, they're the scores and you saw these people do all this. And then it's like, wow, some people would put up scores that were so amazing that
as a guide,
wow.
that you're learning, like there's nothing worse than like if another guide or a couple guides like kick your butt, but then your brain is spinning too. You're like, well,
how?
Wait, did they? Or what am I trying to learn from this? But with the competitions, this sounds really weird, but my best competitions are the ones where some French guy or Czech guy just kicks my ass.
Mm-hmm.
That's like my favorite type of competition because my brain starts spinning and going, what did he do or she do? And it's like that type of learning is great. And the funny part too is after these competitions are over, if they speak English, most of these people don't speak English on the world circuit. A lot of them do, I guess. They'll just give you your flies and go, here's what I did. I fished blobs underneath the tree limbs. And I'm like, really? Oh my God, I never would have thought of that. That's awesome.
Wow.
And so you walk away going, that was the best part of my tournament, was realizing that that the art form just keeps moving,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my favorite part of competition.
Let's talk about that particular type of competition. To bring the listeners up to speed, mm-hmm. You went from the Great Outdoor Games, and then somehow you managed to end up on Team USA, which is a team, and I know very little about it. I told you this before. This was where my career deviated into saltwater, and I didn't go down this road. I knew this road existed, and Carter was kind of dabbling in this world, and I was interested in doing it, but I just kind of said, you know what, I got to go all in down here. And so this is where our paths split. Right here. And you and I both won the Great Outdoor Games. I chose to go in saltwater, and then you end up pursuing this other, or having the opportunity to, and obviously enjoying it. And tell me about getting on that Team USA and how you found out about it, how you get on that team.
Sure. Yeah. I actually remember having a phone call with you back during that time, and you called and said, I'm really curious about this stuff. If I come up, can I stay and go through a competition? You show me the ropes and I want to do it. And then I think a couple of weeks later, you said, I can't fly up there.
Like I probably had two kids at home, and they were both in diapers.
I can't do this. I remember you being curious about it. At that point, I'd probably only been doing it for a year or so. Basically, what happened is that it's been around since the 80s, so forever. Team USA. It's kind of under the same umbrella, like an Olympic sanctioned sports organization that the casting, right? Mm-hmm. The Ray Jacks and all that stuff. Right. That's been around forever. And it's Phipps Moosh, which is a SIPS organization, and it's headquartered in Europe. And basically they run the organization. So the Team USA is sanctioned by them, and there's only one Team USA that's allowed to go to all these world championships under that organization in Europe. And it isn't just in Europe either. I was a year and a half ago, I was in South Africa competing.
Wow.
And it was just an awesome competition. One other thing about competitions, I do like presentations every now and then, because people are like, hey, talk about competitions. And it's kind of just one of those things that it's there's so many opinions and all that type of stuff. And I just kind of share my opinion. Obviously it's not for everybody. But there's a history. To do these presentations, I went and studied the histories. I mean, the competitions in fly casting and actually even fly fishing have been going on for 100 years, a couple hundred years, especially in England. And it's not necessarily just something that started 10 years ago. But anyway, back to that, the Team USA that was going on, you had some people in that organization. I'm trying to think of some of the people that would have been there. It was kind of a gentleman's deal, and some of the industry people, like, some of the shop owners and the people in Jackson, realized that there was no representation from the U.S., so they started a team. And do you remember the World Championships were in Jackson?
I do remember that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and all of us kind of did some stuff. I guided the Italian team for 2 weeks, and all that stuff was kind of happening at that time. And Team USA didn't. I can't remember what they did. They may have finished last. And you can't do that on your home waters, like out of all those countries. These tournaments can be big. They can be up to 30 countries. And I think some of the people got together. I know Jack Dennis was on the board, and they got together and said, let's field a more competitive team. So we need a selection process. And the first selection process was whoever we try out has to have tournament experience and has to have won a major tournament of some kind, anywhere. Could be a lake tournament, could be the one fly, could be the outdoor games. So I got called.
That's very strange because there are very few of those, right? Like there are very few competition, fly fishing competitions at that point.
Totally. Casting. They used a few people, they tried people out that won casting competitions because there were more casting competitions than fishing competitions. So that's how they did it. And then we kind of had a mini fish off with a few people, and they took notes. And, luckily I was on the fish off happened on the South Fork, which is like crazy. So I looked okay. And next thing I know, I'm going to Spain, and I'm on a jet with Jeff Currier next to me, and he's trying to teach me the ropes and say, okay, here you go. And I've known you forever, but this is a different world you're moving into here. These Europeans will take your pants down and hand you your lunch. And, as a fishing guide, you sometimes get real comfortable, like, oh, I'm a pretty good fisherman. And he was trying to set me up and say, look, this is their home turf. They're really talented, skilled anglers. It's not just nymphing like you've heard. It's, the majority of these guys are amazing dry fly fishermen. Most of these tournaments are won with 7X and small dries. And so that's kind of how I got into it. The other thing too, is I remembered my experience with the Italian team. And this is a great story. I think you guided a team too. You were there in 97, weren't you?
I believe so.
We all got Joe. Remember, Joe came in. He's like, "You guys are guiding these teams. You're not going to speak very much English." And we were all kind of like,
I do remember this. I haven't thought about this in a long time.
Yeah,
but I do remember this.
Bunk. Like, I think I may have even been you and Alex's roommate at the time.
Yeah,
I can't remember. But we were kind of griping about it. Like, I got to be in a boat with these guys from the other side of the planet that don't speak English. And I remember getting in the boat, and I was like, whoa. And we couldn't speak English. Like, it was Italian, and that was it. And so there's a language barrier there. But I looked, and I was like, oh, these guys are fishing 7X, and they've got a 10-foot rod. Like, nymphing rods really weren't around back then yet. They hadn't been fully, in production, industry production. But I think they were using remember, there were 10-foot 5 weights back then that people used, but they needed that length to fish 3 flies. And this guy, Luigi, who was like the world champion the year before or whatever, I just kept my mouth shut and let them do their thing and tried to put them on fish. And at one point, I'll never forget this. He had a small woolly bugger on his top dropper, and he had 2 CDC flies, and he had a massive 18-foot leader that was 7X. I think it might even been level, and he could cast it beautifully. And we pulled up into a little riffle area like we do. And I saw him throw this in and start dancing the woolly bugger, and it was the front fly. And what he was doing is he was bringing fish in to the other 2 dries. And I realized it. I was like, oh, he's got his, he should have the woolly bugger on the bottom. Like, what's happening here? Make a long story short, I have no idea how many fish those guys boated, but at one point he he netted 3 fish on one cast. And I was like, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I'll never see that again as long as I live. And he did it again right toward the end of the day. He did it twice in one day. Took 3 fish on one cast.
On 7X.
He was so proficient that he netted all 3 of them really quick. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I just was like, okay, there's a whole another level of angling out there that I don't understand anything about. I thought this was our world. And it wasn't, and so at that point I started piecing those things together and saying, that'd be fun to learn about what these people do in different places. And so, I stayed in touch with those guys. I'm still friends with a lot of those Italian guys, and I see them on this other circuit. So
that's so cool.
That's kind of how I got onto Team USA. And I got shown the ropes, and I had some success with some finishes. And just the travel has been one of the greatest things. It's meeting people and travel and learning has just been so cool. But yeah, I want to make sure and talk about how the team is now. It evolved into a circuit, kind of like it's kind of like trying to make the U.S. ski team.
Mm-hmm.
Kids cruise around to different regions, and they do smaller races, and they build points, and then they eventually build enough points to make it to a nationals. Anybody can go sign up for a small, like kind of local regional, and then you start to learn what to do. There are rules, like you can't use split shot, you can't use indicators. You have to have continuous line. A lot of these rules are set up to make sure that you're good on the resource over in Europe. Your flies have to be a certain distance apart so that there's no snagging of fish. A lot of these rules are just set up for the conservation of that. And I might add too, when you said that there's the competitions you've been a part of have given back.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a conservation symposium at all these world championships, and they give money back from the entry fees, and so it's highly focused on the resource, these competitions, when they go there.
Now, before we go on, it's interesting that they don't allow split shot and they don't allow indicators, because I don't know a lot about European nymphing. You can call it so many different things. Euro nymphing, Czech nymphing, Polish nymphing, contact nymphing, what else? Long rod nymphing, American high sticking, all kinds of things like this. I've heard it called so many different things, and I'm confused because I missed this whole wave. Right, I missed it. I was not fishing trout as much as I was, and I would just go back out there and do the same thing that we always did. And but it's interesting because as I'm learning more about this, when they, and this is the same thing that happens in saltwater tournaments, when you don't allow something, the participants will figure out how to do that same thing better without the indicator, right? So when you say you cannot use an indicator, which for saltwater fishermen out there that don't trout fish, it's basically a bobber that you have on your line. It could be made out of various materials, of wool to an actual bobber that is the size of a bobber you would use to catch a bluegill or a crappie. And people, you drift that down, and if it goes under or hesitates or whatever, you set the hook and you usually have a fish or a rock or a stick or something. But something has stopped the line from going down there. Now with the Euro nymphing, there are no indicators allowed. So what has happened is now you have contact with the fly the whole time, and if they were trying to be better on the resource, if they had allowed indicators the whole time, don't you think that people would have just gotten better and better and better at indicator nymphing? And there may not have ever been a need to go to this new style, or it's not a new style now.
That's a good question. I think that the indicator fishing was a bigger North American phenomenon than it was European. They did a lot of the Sawyer nymph and all that stuff. And they did a lot of sight nymphing, and their fish are clear waters, very spooky. Indicators are basically like throwing a medicine ball on top of a fish.
Right. So then why would they outlaw it if that would seem like a disadvantage? Yeah,
you're right. It could be a disadvantage, and you can get around it. You can tie you could tie a Chernobyl ant on and still indicator fish. We dry dropper all the time.
Right. Okay.
Their deal was that they wanted the leaders clean. They always step down. There's space between the flies. And some of it is also to make things more technical,
Okay.
you know, like it's just to raise the level. It's funny that you say that people eventually figure out that when a rule is placed on you, that you get better. A lot of our younger anglers, when I was there in the early 2000s that were coming in, they were young, amazing anglers. And their best method was indicator fishing. They're like, no, I'll always, indicator fishing is the best. Like I'll always do, you know, and when we said, no, you got to take the indicator off, they struggle, right? They're like, how am I supposed to, but eventually you learn, like, you're right. It's so dynamic. You can change the levels with, you know, with the indicator, you got to pull it in and adjust your level. And, you know, as a guide, they were constantly doing that. You don't have to do that. And suddenly you're like, oh, I don't want an indicator. I'll never fish with an indicator. Like I don't even have indicators in my boat anymore.
You know who was the first non-indicator fisherman I ever saw?
Who?
Joe Bressler. That guy never used an indicator, and he would use a girdle bug, and he would smoke everybody. And then he went to the one fly and won the one fly. He showed up at the Orvis store. Do you remember the day that he won the one fly? He shows up at the Orvis store and he's like, I don't have a fly. And he just went over to the bin and picked something out and said, I'll just use this one. And then he goes and wins the thing.
Yeah. Like, and I think he also probably was too lazy to go get indicators.
Right. Well, he didn't even know how to use them. He had done that since he was a kid. That's how he fished always. There were no such things as indicators when he was a kid.
So he was used to that.
Yeah. And he just did that.
He probably thought indicators were a waste of time. I remember how Joe would always make us, before I put you out with a client, I'm your client for the day.
Yes.
He did that to both you and me.
For hundreds of days.
Yeah. All right. Because he was getting free fishing.
And he didn't want to be in the office. As soon as he hired Cynthia, he was like, let's go fishing.
Yeah. And I remember we're on the snake, and I go, what are you doing? And he was just basically throwing a long leader nymph line out there. And he was just letting it go to the bottom, and he was dancing it and all sorts of stuff. And he was catching these huge, like 16, 17, 18 inch cutthroats that I didn't even know were on like Wilson to South Park.
Right.
You know, I was like, what in the world? You're right. You know, and that's another thing too, is the origins of things. People get all hung up on that. Well, that's, you know, my great grandpappy who settled the state of Colorado invented high stick, you know, like the bottom line is like hundreds of years, everybody's been doing the same thing. It just rotates around. There's no like really new flies or new techniques. It's all kind of just based on the area and what they do. Mm-hmm. I'd say Euro nymphing has its own thing because of some of the things like bead heads were invented for competitions. Like
because they couldn't use split shot.
Exactly.
So there's a great example of what I'm talking about. Because you can't use split shot, there's this innovation of all new flies. Right. And then they become even more effective than the old flies because the bead will simulate an air bubble, and it can simulate all kinds of things. Plus its weight. And then there's different materials of bead heads and everything else. I find that to be super interesting. The same thing happens like in saltwater tournaments where they'll say no chumming. Right. So what is chumming? That's where people will chop up a shrimp and throw it out there and wait, and then throw another shrimp out there, and the bonefish will smell all that. Well, then that if you can't chum, and that's the way to fish, then people started doing this booger rig where they would thread pieces of shrimp all the way up the line, and they would actually have more shrimp out there than they would before, and they'd throw that out there, and they were catching bigger bonefish and more bonefish, and it was just incredible. But it was because you couldn't chum that someone figured out, well, this isn't chumming, right? This is what the rules say. You can do this. Yeah. So you can. And
it opened up a whole nother thing. It's a little ironic that the people who try to set the rules, a lot of times they are trying to, hey, we don't want to have that big an impact on this. You know, there's time limits, and, you know, like in the Czech Republic, I was just there last week, and they made a big deal like, hey, you guys, be easy on the fish, you know, don't skip them in, make sure that you keep the fish in the water the whole time on your way to measure it. Fish has to be in the water the whole time. It was a big deal. So that is a lot of times their goal, but you're right. It's funny. God, where was I? A long time ago, I was with my buddy Brett, and we were tarpon fishing, and he was talking about this tournament in of a Gasparilla, and he's like, they're making jigging illegal, and you have to use live bait now because the guys are going straight down and just killing it. Like they're jigging these. I don't know what they were doing.
Well, that was a controversial thing. They were you had the jiggers and you had the live baiters, and there were. The live baiters didn't like the jiggers, and the jiggers didn't really necessarily mind the live baiters. The live baiters would drift like we drift a nymph through, at the same speed as the current. So the live bait's going nice and easy through there, and they would set up way in advance, and they would get a drift going. They'd have to, a couple rods out, and then the jiggers would see the fish roll, and they would run in front of them, and then they would start jigging, and they would mess up everything, right? And so then they would hook fish, and now these people they had set the drift up, they had spent 30 minutes getting ready to get into the fish, and now, I don't know, it was just a clash of two styles that did not mesh in this small little area. And so the live baiters are all upset because they say that the jigging people are snagging the fish, which I'm sure in many situations they may have been, but somebody created another technique that worked really well. And it was like this heavy lead with a jig sticking at a right angle off of it. And you would go over, I didn't fish in this area, but I had been there before, and you would mark these giant clouds of tarpon. So if you're just, I would think that if your line's going through them and it hooks on their their mandible that comes off of their jaw, and you come tight, you're going to hook them underneath the jaw. And I don't know. That's what people were saying, but still, it still took skill to be that tight to your jig and to do this whole thing. And then they catch them real fast, and I don't know, that turned into a mess. And then it's like, okay, now, yes, you have to use live bait because this other is too effective. I don't know if that I can get behind the too effective rod and reel fishing, right? Like they even say that about Euro nymphing. Like some people say, oh, it's too effective. Well, that's the goal of every style of fishing, right? Like you want to catch a fish on every cast. And if you are able to do that, then it's up to the angler, in my opinion, to say, okay, we've caught enough of those. Let's try a different technique, or let's move on,
I always say that to people. I'm like, like you and I have seen on the South Fork, no one, like the rate of catching fish on a riffle on the South Fork is it's the fastest rate of any fish catching I've ever seen, and there are some situations with grayling in Europe that are almost that fast, but that's up to the people that are pounding those fish on that. You're like, hey, we've caught 10 really nice fish. Let's roll off of this riffle. Like that. You're right. It's up to you to figure that out. And it's up to the angler to make sure and take it easy on the resource. I know that in some places of Europe, I've heard that they actually have signs saying European nymphers, please take it easy on these holes, like as far as, because you can go in and burn out a whole hole. But for me, I as soon as I start to have any sort of success, I switch things.
Okay. So
I can't handle it.
Let's ask you're allergic to success. Oh, we've caught a fish. Ooh, gross. Let's stop doing that. Let's change everything.
No, I just want to see if something else will work.
So a lot of people that are listening to this don't know what European nymphing is. So can you give a little primer, and obviously as we kind of talked about the history of this, Americans weren't really privy to this technique until Team USA starts going over there and comes back and is like, dude, you won't believe. And like your example of the Italian team, you won't believe what's going on. I didn't have the same experience when I guided those guys. I was like showing them the fish and they were kind of struggling. They weren't great at it. You saw something that I didn't see. I certainly didn't see someone.
There's different levels of fishing prowess on the different countries. So and I'm sure they might struggle in certain situations. I know, just as an aside, the Italian guys, after I was like, okay, you guys are pretty dialed at catching all these small fish. Let's have some fun. And I just bit their leaders in half and put on Chernobyls. And that's all they wanted to do after that. And I think they won a medal catching the small fish and the numbers, but they're truly, those guys even today tell me like that was my favorite competition ever because the practice was so fun. We used those giant foam flies and caught big fish on the banks.
Yeah. See, there's another innovation. I had Ed Emery on the podcast, and he was talking about when the Chernobyl ant made its way to Jackson because he was doing all the guiding on the green, and that's where that fly came from. And I don't know if it was him and a whole bunch of anglers that people used to do that all the time. They would fish a little circuit through the West, and I'd be like, "Where were you last week?" And we were on the green, and this is what we were using, and I want to put it on here. And you look at it, and it's like, no, we're not using that. And somewhere along the line, they just put it on and throw it over there, and it's like, whoa, we're using that all day from now on.
A flip-flop sandal. Yeah. You're like, what the heck?
Yeah, it worked great. But, it's something that comes from a different place and moves into an area and just goes crazy. You see it in bass fishing. You see it in saltwater. You see it in fly fishing as well. But going back to the European nymphing, we were kind of seeing what other people were doing in other places and bringing it to the United States. And then it went crazy. And a lot of people got really, really good at it, yourself included. But just give us a very short little, what is it? And how does it differ from what somebody might know as nymphing?
So I didn't know anything about it. In fact, I was kind of like you. I think I went whole summers without buying a nymph on the Southland.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Like I had my best summer is like, I didn't catch a whitefish the whole year and I didn't buy a nymph the whole year, like as a guide. So that was my mentality. And I was told like, hey, to catch these grayling and stuff like that, you gotta learn how to be a better nympher. There's bumper stickers now that say nymphing's hard, and so basically, I through Jack Dennis, he was like, hey, there's this guy Vladi that basically has revolutionized this form of nymphing, this Polish nymphing. And there was some competition in the 80s where he caught more fish than the next three teams combined by himself. And so he had developed this tight line nymphing, this contact nymphing, and he called it Polish nymphing. He was literally fishing mostly underneath the tip of his rod. And sure, there are some differences with high sticking. A lot of people say, well, this is just high sticking. Kind of everything that goes into it, all the gear, the long rods, the lines, the techniques. Most high stickers back in the 70s aren't using 7X, right? They're using 3X and they're using girdle bugs without beads on them. And they're using split shot. And they're, there's a whole kind of category that all this stuff fits together with. And it was kind of developed in these grayling areas and stuff. And some people say it was because the poles, their lines were falling apart. And so they couldn't really cast very far. So they were forced to fish really close to them and into the pods of grayling. And they realized that, hey, this contact is really important. This is a breakthrough. And so basically it got started there. Jack and I can't remember who I went over with, maybe one of my teammates, Norm. We went over to Poland to go through Vladi's little boot camp. Like he took us to the San River and all these places and the Dunajec and we were terrible. Like he would yell at us and almost basically throw rocks at us and stuff because we were so bad at it. But after a few weeks of just having this world champion, watch you and go, no, you need to lead it faster. You need to do this. And here's how to rig it. And you started to realize this is the cool part. This isn't just some technique where I'm lighting a stick of dynamite, throwing it in there and then netting all the fish. Once I have a basis for this, I'm fishing again. This is fishing. Everybody who knows this technique, we all branch out into our own fishing. You got to decide where you're going to catch the fish, if you're going to lead the flies, dead drift them, whatever it is, the fly selection. So that was one of the first things. And Jeff Courier was good friends with Vladi, so he'd been over there before. And that was kind of some of the genesis of understanding that. Certainly guys like Jay Buckner, you remember Jay? Yeah. They had done previous competitions and they were, some of the first guys to start seeing this stuff and going, okay, we need to learn this. I remember Jay saying, you got to focus on this stuff. You got to figure this out or you're going to get your butt kicked. And so that was kind of the genesis of a lot of of my learning of European nymphing. And, I did okay in the competitions, but not great. You know, the Europeans are always going to kick your butt with that stuff on their home water. But the weird part was when I brought it back, like I had my my rod and my rig, and I would go over to a hole in the South Fork off the side of an island, and it would be one cast, one fish, one cast, one fish. And my clients started going, holy crap, what are you doing? Like it's hot right now. There's no fish up, and you just caught 10 fish on 10 casts. And of course they're like, teach me, like, I want to do this, And so I just started kind of figuring out the European nymphing thing that way. And I was lucky enough to have all these amazing guides, like from Spain and that type of stuff. And every time you go over there, you learn something new, and they kind of show you their thing. Like in Czech Republic, we were just over there, and our guide David he's like one of the top 10 anglers in the world, in my opinion. I'm just watching him. Everything's overhang, and they're bow and arrow casts, and I was just watching him, and I was like, what X are you using? He's like 7.5. I'm like, wow. Do you think you could go down to 7? He's like, nope. Now these fish would be out. It would change the fishing. Just things like that. You're like, really? He even fished 8. While I was watching him, and so that was kind of the genesis of bringing it back here. And we're lucky, right? Those of us that got to go over there and learn that style. And if it hadn't been so successful on all of our rivers and wherever we went, probably I would have just used it for competitions or whatever. But we started using it all over the place. And there's this weird thing. People that I teach how to do this, they don't understand before they do it, but you're in such close contact with the fish, and it's so visual that it's kind of like dry fly fishing 20 feet away. Everything happens. And when you hit a fish that close, they go nuts. Like right. It's a different type of take. It's like it sends a bolt of electricity through your body that you don't get from setting from a distance. You're just on with the fish all of a sudden. It's in the air. And you were watching the cider, like we use colored ciders.
Well, let's go through the rig. Like
okay.
Go through the rig just briefly.
Okay, so the long rod, you can do it with a 9-foot rod, but it doesn't work as well because you need the reach and all the angles. So that's why the industry has gone to a lot of the long light rods.
So a long light rod is how long?
It's 10 foot to 11 foot.
Okay. And
once again, you have rules, right? They tell you can't fish with more than 11-foot rod in competitions. So basically the industry doesn't make anything more than an 11-foot rod. The lines, you can use a regular fly line and just have a long leader. Once again, they've put rules in that say the leaders can't be longer than twice the rod length because people had such long leaders, and they're trying to encourage people to use their fly lines more. And with my Euro nymphing, I use the fly line all the time just to shoot it across the river and that type of thing. But there were people like, they would just use mono. Mm-hmm. And you've seen that before, especially down like in the southern part of the country, like on the White River and stuff like that. There's people that are super effective with that. Well, I think that the rule makers wanted more fly line usage. And so they shortened the leader maximum. So those leaders, the thinner the better usually, because the leader sinks. It has less water resistant the thinner it is. And so you have a more you have a better presentation to the fish because a thick leader, like let's say a 9-foot 3X or 4X, that'd be terrible for European nymphing because it's tapered and it's moving around in the water. The fish can totally tell that there's a human attached to it. So we go level, with our stuff for the most part of the leader. And like in Czech Republic, I fished mostly 6.5, 7 the whole time. And so those nymphs with beads on them can do their thing a little bit better. And so long leaders, bead heads are key for European nymphing. And that's where tungsten has become so popular and all the jig hooks. A lot of people don't realize that these jig hooks, the reason that they came in, it was for the competitions. Your fly turns upside down and you can let it bounce off the bottom and not get hung up on anything because it's a jig hook. It flips over, or a grub hook. And so they used to, way back before they had the bead heads and stuff, they used to put lead on the rounded part and it would flip over. And that makes total sense. And so I remember fishing with jig hooks and all that stuff 10, 15 years ago on the South Fork, I probably got hung up 80% less than the other guides who were just fishing your traditional hooks that hung up on every last thing. So those are types of aspects of this style. And basically what you do is you use your legs a lot. You stay in control. It's true. There's shoreline nymphing where you're fishing basically under the tip of your rod, which is what Vladi taught me. Really effective for grayling and a hole that you let settle back in and the fish come back in. Because fish do that. You walk in, they disperse, and then they settle back in and get comfortable. And then in other parts of Europe, like in Spain and Italy and France, the fish are so spooky that you can't get close to them. So those, and Czech Republic was a little bit like that too. You have to cast a long distance away and basically try to short line nymph at a distance. And so there's long line and short line. And if anybody's curious about this stuff, Worldcast, they had me do like 8 months ago, they had me do a podcast on it, and you can go to the Worldcast angler site and
I saw that. It's very good. We'll put it in the notes.
Yeah, I'll probably put people to sleep during it, but well, a lot of this stuff gets technical, and I try to keep it beginner to advanced, but that's hard to do. In a nutshell, those are the things that you're doing out there. And the biggest thing that I learned was you're in contact with your flies. At the Great Outdoor Games, I went with, do you remember, there's a guy named Ralph Cutter, and then Andy, the guy that was in the outdoor games. I'm forgetting Andy's last name. You probably knew him.
I don't know. I don't think he was there my year.
Great fly tire. He was in the outdoor games like maybe 1 year or something, but he ended up being my guide, and I didn't know the Reno area. Basically they took a camera underneath and said, here's the deal. This is an indicator fisherman. And they had the nymphs, and they showed the fish come up and grab the fly and spit it out. And the angler didn't even see the indicator move. And then you show a European nympher. I think I was the European nympher. I went in there and they're filming it. The fish it's contact. As soon as he touches that fly, it's in him. And that's a huge difference. It's not just the light lines and the fact that you're staying in one food lane, so the presentation is better. It's the contact. You don't miss fish when it touches them. Whereas fish, and you and I know this, when things get tough on the South Fork or whatever, they mouth it and spit it.
Yes.
They do it before anyone can set and before anyone even knows. That's probably the biggest takeaway that I noticed through the years of doing this technique. And I don't know, it's just a fun technique to add to everything else. You can go out there and it's another arrow to your quiver.
Sure.
It's a different style. Yeah,
for sure. And as an angler that's trying to be, a complete angler, you should know all of them, right? You should, that's part of your responsibility as a great angler, is to know how to do, at least be proficient at all of them. You may not be the best at any of them, but if you should be proficient at everything. For me, I want to be able to pick up a bait caster and throw that well enough that I could fish with it all day. I want to be able to Euro nymph. I want to be able to spay cast. I want to be able to throw a 10 weight to permit, at the end of the fly line.
They're fun deal. They're fun techniques.
Each one, and it all requires practice. Let's talk about, before we move on, tell us about the flies, because that's a different thing. For a lot of people, they just nymph with one single fly or a single dry fly. Now, this is basically a 3 fly rig, right?
Usually 2.
2 fly. Okay, so
it can be 3. Each competition is different. On lakes, I fished 3 flies on the lake in Czech Republic, but 2. I mean, remember, I even fished 1 fly because you have small rivers with overhang, and I was bow and arrow casting. So,
okay.
1 or 2.
But on the 2 rig fly, you got one that's heavier and one that's lighter, right?
Right.
And how do you tie those on? Which ones where?
Basically, you have a tag that hangs off. Like from a lot of people use barrel knots or hold on, my cat's scratching at the door. He's gonna make a noise. You tie off and you leave a tag, and the bottom one is what we call a point fly. And that's heavier, and it makes things a little bit easier to control. It's also partly what how your presentation works. Those can be kind of attractors, heavier beads, and then the dropper fly, the one above it, is usually more of a natural. And when the fish are active, they'll come up for it. So, and of course it's fishing, so you can switch all that stuff around, but that's traditional. Mm-hmm. And if you want, like some people are curious about this stuff, I can send you some pictures of the flies we used in the Czech Republic. Like,
yeah, let's do it. We'll put them in this.
Post them on your site, and people will be like, "Oh, really? That's what you used?"
Yeah, for sure. We'll put them in this too. Yeah, send that stuff along. It's real interesting because I know that some people, especially a lot of the people that listen to this, like to get out of Florida. They like to get and go and experience different types of fishing, and fly fishing for trout is one of them. And so you have a lot of people that are trying to learn new techniques or just, we have a lot of learners that listen to this podcast. So to be able to interview someone like yourself that's been all over the world and learn from all of these different people, and then brought it back and you're preparing with the other people on the team, and you're doing that on the South Fork, and you're doing that on the Snake, and you're doing it. I'm sure that you're trying some weird things on Silver Creek. Like, oh yeah, you got to, right? Like those are your testing grounds. And if it works, in the Czech Republic, and it works on Silver Creek, and it works on the South Fork, I think you've probably proven that it works just about anywhere. Right. And that's really that's really what we're trying to get to here of just, what is this technique and why does it work so well? But what you said is very interesting, that you're always in contact with it. And, there's so many times when, you'll be with clients or whatever, someone's indicator nymphing, and you're saying set, and they're like, I don't have anything. And then their buddy comes in there and catches 3 fish in that same run. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, all those were bites. Like everything that you're getting were bites. Or it might even be me. And then my son comes through and catches, a fish. It's like, wow. Sure. I'm sure that today's a good day to fish. It's cloudy, it's overcast, the temperature's right. I'm putting it through this beautiful run, and I'm not getting it. I haven't caught anything. Right. Well, doesn't mean that they're not biting your fly. And that's where this can really make an amazing difference. So where are you with the competitions now? You spent 10 years doing this and then took a break, and then you're going back to it, or what are you doing?
Yeah. You know how cats are. This cat's down, one's out, right?
Yeah.
Stop it. Yeah, basically, so we have a youth team, an adult team, and a master's team, and the master's is 50 and over. When I probably put 11 straight years, maybe 10 on the adult team. I was never on a youth team. It started, well, actually it was going on when I was on the adult team, but age-wise, the youth team is up to 18. So, and then my kids, I didn't want to take every vacation and travel, but, twice a year or whatever. And sometimes you're in these places for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and because you're trying to learn the rivers and everything. And so I took a big break from it, and then joined back on the master's team now that my kids are a little bit older, and started traveling again and getting into it. And it's funny too, because it's all the Europeans that I was in the adult team with, they're all older now, and they're all, a lot of them are ex-world champions and everything, and just great relationships. So yeah, I would say I've probably been doing it for the past, 20 years, and with about a 6 or 7 year, maybe 8 year gap in there.
So at the very beginning, USA puts together a team because we're horrible and we come in last place on our own. Where are we now? Where do we stand in the world rankings? Or
obviously it's always dependent on the area. But our adult team is, very solidly a top 5 team now. And it's not uncommon to win a medal. We haven't pushed through, and we've missed the gold medal by a couple fish a couple times, like in Bosnia just a couple years ago, got silver. So one of the more respected teams now, top. Our master's team is a top 3. We finished 4th in Czech Republic, and we finished 2nd in South Africa. So yeah, like the fact that we have a huge group of people that are into this thing, it's kind of interesting. Young people you know how the industry is trying to get young people to get into the fly fishing. They gravitate toward this stuff. Not just the competitive part of it, but just the techniques and and just kind of the dynamic aspect of all of it. I think that's a big thing with the industry, because I know just talking to like Perkins and some of those guys back in that, they're like, we really think that this is an area of tactical fly fishing and stuff that the young people like, and we get feedback on that. And so, like Echo Rods, who I design rods for, and a lot of the companies, they're pretty supportive of everything, and they realize that there's a massive world market out there, that competitive angling is a way of life for the Brits, and it's something that all the companies have been in on around the world.
Well, think about it, how big bass fishing is here, and competitive red fishing and the competitive saltwater tournaments. Huge money, huge participation. And that's something that a lot of those countries don't have. They don't have the competitive bass fishing. They don't have something like a redfish. They don't have the competitive saltwater tournaments like we do for all of the different species. And we're so lucky in this country to have, the state of Florida, and then all the way up the East Coast. Those tournaments go all the way up to Maryland and Maine. And then you have, California. It was a whole different fishery. I mean, we have so much to offer. Then some of these countries are landlocked. Some of these countries don't have that opportunity. And so this would be the next best thing. And then you have all the rough fishing that those guys are doing over there, which also has to play a part into this. All the carp fishing, all of the...
I was just going to say that coarse fishing is...
I call it rough. I call it rough fishing, not coarse fishing.
Almost bigger than... it's almost bigger than our bass stuff. The World Angling Games is where everybody comes together for a world championship. And they did it in Portugal. I can't remember when it was, but Carter was on the like the sea fishing team, like the blue water team. And it was in the Azores, and you'd be shocked. When we got to the hotel, I was like, hey, there's Roland Martin. And I can't remember who else was on that. Gary Yamamoto and Kevin Van Dam, or whoever was there on the U.S. bass team.
Scott Martin, I think.
We had beers with them and dinner with them and hung out. And I don't think Roland remembered, but he did an overnight with us and did a show.
Did he?
Down on the South Fork? Yeah.
Man, he's awesome. I had him on this podcast. It was one of my favorite podcasts I've ever had. He told the whole story about him getting into fishing, and it was really one of the best podcasts. And you know what? To his credit, he went way out of his way to do this podcast.
Nice.
And I mean, a couple hours out of his way. He's like, oh, I'm not that far away. I'll just drive over. And he is just super genuine and nice. And I found myself one time doing a Bass Pro Shop seminar, and I had to go to two places in the Panhandle and then over to Louisiana to do this. It was two stores in one day, and then there was a store. So it was 4 stores in a weekend, 2 stores in one day. So started out over here, then we did 2, on a Friday, and then 2 on Saturday, and then Sunday over here. And I ended up riding in the same car, just me and Roland Martin, did that whole tour. And man, he is the nicest guy. He is so nice, and he has had such an incredible life. And just, talk about innovations, and like the innovations that he did as a bass fisherman were really significant and really advanced the sport of bass fishing forward. But I think very highly of him. He's a really cool guy.
When you see him on TV, you're like, oh, he can't be that nice with that infectious smile and stuff. And then when you sit down and have a meal or whatever, when we hung out together, doubling back on what you said, like, oh, that, the Europeans don't do this or that. I said, well, you guys just can put pillowcases over your head and win the gold, right? Because of the, you guys are big time competitive bass anglers. And he was like, no, he's like, these Italians are these guys can bass fish over here.
Yeah,
he's like,
sure they can.
They don't speak English. They're good enough to come over and compete in our tournaments, as you've seen with the Japanese anglers and stuff like that.
Yeah. He's
like, they just don't live here. And sure enough, I think they got the bronze or something. Like the Italians beat them, and then, of course, those guys are awesome. But he was telling me, he's like, he's like, the Europeans are awesome, like warm water fishermen. Awesome. He's like, they don't have like the ESPN coverage and everything on their tournaments, but they're very big time. Their tournaments, there's a lot of money involved, and especially for carp, like you said. So, and I don't know. Carter was telling me that they're pretty big time over there for some of the saltwater stuff.
Oh, I'm sure.
And that, you know how Europe is. They get very fired up about like competing with each different country and national, type stuff. So, but anyway, I learned a lot just seeing some of those different types of groups over there. And I mean, overall, I would have to say some of my greatest experiences in my life, especially with things like food. I remember I was in Portugal and I'm there and my guide reaches in and says, "Here, check that out." And he grabs a chicken foot out of my soup. At first I was like, "This is the best soup I've ever had in my life." And he's like, "Yeah, check it out. It's chicken feet soup." And he's like, "You're supposed to suck all the fat off of this chicken foot." And I was like, and I learned to just go with it. Wherever I was, just eat whatever you see. Like in the Czech Republic, I've always been a tartar fan, but some of the other guys were like, "Wait, that's raw beef right there in a like a pile, and we just eat it." It's like, yeah.
So have you gotten in trouble like that?
God, I was going to try to avoid talking about that in this deal. I got sick this year, but no. It wasn't from, us fishing guides, we have like steel stomachs because we eat crappy rotted food all the time on the river. And so I've never really had food poisoning. And one of my teammates and I think we stopped at a little deli in the morning and got some potatoes and we both ate them and got sick. So it's the only time. And I've eaten everything, eyeballs, and I've
never from the water anywhere or anything like that.
I've never gotten sick. The courier is terrified of biting his flies off. He won't touch the water with his mouth because basically what happens is when you're traveling, and as you know, you probably traveled fly fishing travel, is your body's just not used to the unique bugs in those areas. And so you can get sick, but I've never had bad luck with it. I've always been okay, but this one time got me. So I missed 2 days of practice.
Oh man.
I was in bed. So it was not the greatest thing in the world, but overall the Czech Republic was, the food was awesome. And it was such a great experience. I learned so much too about just how their fish act and believe it or not, a lot of dry fly fishing, not as much as the nymphing, but you hear a lot about they stock fish in those countries because there's so many people. Almost all my sections that I competed in were wild fish.
Really?
Wild browns, wild grayling, wild chubs.
On the Team USA stuff, is it always for trout and grayling?
That's usually the main focus, trout and grayling. Yeah. The funny part is obviously if we're in South Africa, we're going to take a day off and go catch yellowfish. And so, we're there, hey, let's go do this. But yeah, the focus would be on trout and grayling. Yeah.
Interesting. So
just because that's this deal.
Man, it's been awesome to catch up with you. I know we probably it's a Sunday. You're doing this on a Sunday. So I appreciate that. But let's just to wrap it up. What do you think, what would 3 takeaways be for these 20 years of world travel, competition, bringing it back to the home waters? What would your 3 biggest takeaways be?
Probably just the biggest one would be how much I didn't know, how much I needed to learn. There's my cat. But I think that's the case in all of life. Is you realize how much you don't know. And that was a big thing. And it was fun. The relationships, once you broaden your horizons and leave North America, it really changes you as a person. You start to have different perspectives and you're just not as locked in on the way you see the world. So that would be the second one. And then, I would probably say the overall fun I've had with fishing. A lot of us with trout fishing, I think you even said this to me once. You're like, I'm ready. Like, I remember you said, I'm ready to move on away from trout. Like I need to do something different. Let me know if I'm popping out or
no, that's good. We got you now.
And I remember going, oh yeah, no, I wasn't ready yet, but and you moved on to something different, different types of fish. And I've heard that from other people, like, hey, I'm done with this fish, I'm moving on to different fish, which is totally natural. I know that like we fished in such a place with giant wild native fish and stuff that a small fish might seem like, but after being in Europe, my perspective changed. I can go to a river and be really happy catching 10, 12 inch, fish, and the challenge of them. And I'm not like, oh, it's just a small one. It's my perspective changed. So that's probably the final takeaway is that you never know what can develop from your perspective if you experience different things. And so one other final thing that I didn't talk about was, I would say that another big takeaway was the fact that I got to move into rod design with Tim. Right?
Yeah, that's super cool.
I learned so much about that. And Tim approached me and said, hey, you know about these things. You've seen the rods, you've done this. And it was just crazy successful. Like people are all over the North America are into these. And heck, we sell these Echo nymphing rods, the Shadow. We sell them all over the world. In fact, Europe's one of our biggest sellers. So
that's super cool.
Learning about rod design from like a legend like Tim and even Steve, his brother, it was amazing experience, and it never would have happened if I hadn't traveled and got to see all these different experiences. That's
super cool. I had a similar thing, with a rod company and Jim Barchi and working with him and developing saltwater rods, and you just don't understand what goes into this. And you pick up a rod and you're like, that's a really great rod. Or you pick up a rod and you're like, man, I can't throw this thing at all. This is terrible. And it's like, well, maybe if they'd spent 2 more weeks, tweaking that thing, it would have been the best rod. And there were so many rods that I don't know, like I'd put one rod in particular, they sent it to me. I'm casting it. I'm like, man, I can't put my finger on this, but it's just not right. And I put the line heavier on it. Like, well, it wasn't right at the designated line, but now I put this one on it and it's perfect. Don't change it. Now let's go back and start designing this other, it was a 10 weight. I mean, an 11 weight. And so, but that first 11 weight was a perfect 12 weight. And then we went back and started designing the 11 weight again. And it's just a fun. It was
the power.
It's a fun thing.
The power was off.
Yeah. And you're learning all of these different intricacies about this sport that we call fishing. And it's what's interesting about it is like that is still just one little part of fishing. And fly fish. I mean, you can do the same in bass fishing. You can do the same in carp fishing. You can do the same in saltwater fishing. And even every little species in saltwater fishing has all these nuances. And that's why fishing's like a lifetime. It's a lifetime thing. And for me, it's a lifetime learning opportunity. And that's what keeps it fun. Is like the reason I want to move on from one to another is because, maybe I've hit this plateau and I'm just not learning much anymore. And that's probably my fault. And I'm just becoming impatient. And it's like, I want to learn faster. I want to learn more. And the quickest and easiest way to do that is to do something different rather than just seek out, like to learn more. Maybe it would have been necessary to travel and get into this competition thing like you did. And then obviously you're learning from other people all around the world in different countries and different places. And yeah, there's an amazing learning opportunity there. Or you can move on to another species and try that too.
Totally.
Yeah, man.
Totally.
Let's see. What is that?
I got to return your book to you. 20 years.
Does it say my name inside of it? I used to put my name in all the books. That's why you don't loan books out right there. That's it.
He was helping out a first year guide with this. So.
I gave that to you and told you you should read it.
Yeah. Learn about your resource before you start worrying about the fishing.
Well, I learned that from Jay Buckner. He used to come to the guide school and give us a history of Jackson and a history of the rivers and a history of like cowboys and all kinds of stuff. And he was like, these are the things that you talk about on a bad day. These are the things that you talk about on a good day. These are the things that you just learn how to talk about, and you become a more interesting person to the people that are in your boat, or this becomes a more interesting area, or this becomes a more interesting trip. It's not all about the fishing. And, you know, that was a big thing about the magic little area of where we were. I mean, think about like, not that this wasn't going on in other places. Of course, you got West Yellowstone and Bozeman, Montana, and all these other places that you have, you know, Bob Jacklin and all these amazing, you know, the Henry's Fork and all the people that were over there. But in Jackson, you had Vern and Joe Bressler. Oh, yeah. You had Jay Buckner. You had Jack Dennis. Gary. You had Gary. You had just so many of these kind of outfitter luminary type people that show young people like us like what it means to be a professional guide. Somebody like Chris Patterson that was raising a family, you know, and it's like, wow, okay, Bill Happersett, who's booked all the time. And it's like, oh man, these guys are taking this this is like a job. This is like a full-time job. Like, and they're like really professional about it. They're not, you know, showing up all hungover every morning like a bunch of college kids. Like this is like a real profession. And, you know, Vern, if you didn't understand that in the beginning, Vern Bressler would beat you over the head with it until you did understand it, or you wouldn't be there any longer. And he was awesome, man. What an opportunity to learn from him.
That was,
but man, it's been awesome catching up with you. I'd love to do this again. But man, congratulations on a great career and a great competitive career, great guiding career. You've done it, man. You just immersed yourself and did awesome. It's great to see.
Great to catch up with you again. Yeah. If you come out, definitely come stay with us. I'm thinking about having my 17-year-old son go through the guide school. So I don't know if your son is thinking about going through the guide school. That would be kind of wild.
That would be so cool. I wonder if that's ever happened. So my boys are both in Bozeman, Montana. One has graduated college, and the other is a junior in college, and my daughter is a freshman at Auburn. So I don't know. I don't think maybe. I mean, who knows? Maybe they will. Maybe they should.
You let your daughter go to Auburn?
I did. And I went to Alabama.
You're a Bama guy.
Yeah, but I think it was a better choice for her, and she is having a good experience there so far.
Good. My son just got accepted to Montana State.
Oh, really? You think that's where he's going to go?
I think so.
Oh, really? Well, we'll have to hook him up with my boys. They're man, I bought them an old beater hide drift boat, and they just go all the time everywhere. They're hunters, they're fishermen. It would be a great hookup for him to meet Hayden, and then he can show him how to European nymph.
Sure, yeah, Miles does do that. So I'm trying to tell him like, hey, let's put the European nymphing rods down and get you casting a double taper. Out on.
I'll tell you what, that is one thing that my boys can do. They can throw that line because they learned how to fish in saltwater, and they go out there. I look down the river. I'm like, oh yeah, there they are. They're the ones throwing 90 feet over there for no reason. Like the fish are under their feet, but they're throwing 90 feet.
They're casters.
Yeah, they're casters. They're casters. But anyway, man, congratulations on everything, Pete. It's been awesome to reconnect with you, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Nice. Tell Cynthia hi.
I will. All right. See ya.